While the entire world was watching the Middle East, counting bombs in Baghdad, and tracking drones over Kabul, something far darker was happening on another continent. Africa. A continent with 54 nations, endless resources, and almost zero Western media coverage. The CIA ran covert wars across Africa for decades, and nobody said a word. We are talking about toppled presidents, armed militias, assassinated leaders, and engineered civil wars. All documented, all declassified, all buried under layers of Cold War propaganda and convenient amnesia. Covert wars, Africa hidden. This is not conspiracy theory. This is congressional testimony. This is declassified cables. This is the paper trail they hoped you would never follow. From the jungles of the Congo to the deserts of Libya, from the Horn of Africa to the diamond mines of Angola, the fingerprints are everywhere. And today, we are going to trace every single one of them. Because the chaos you see on your screen when Africa makes the news, it did not happen by accident. Someone designed it, and they had a budget. January 1961. Patrice Lumumba, the first democratically elected leader of the Congo, was dragged from a prison cell, beaten, shot, and dissolved in acid. Not by rebels, not by rival tribes, by a CIA-backed operation working with Belgian intelligence. This is not speculation. This was confirmed by the Church Committee hearings in 1975, where the United States Senate itself admitted the CIA had plotted Lumumba's assassination. In the Congo, the weights were tilted. The playing field was never level. Why? Because Lumumba committed the unforgivable sin of being an African leader who wanted African resources to benefit Africans. The Congo sits on what geologists call the geological scandal: cobalt, uranium, copper, diamonds, coltan. The uranium that built the bombs dropped on Hiroshima came from Congolese mines, and the man who wanted to nationalize those mines had to disappear. In his place, the CIA installed Mobutu Sese Seko, a military officer who would rule for 32 years, steal an estimated $5 billion, and keep Western mining companies happy. Lumumba killed Mobutu installed. This was not foreign policy. This was a hostile corporate takeover disguised as anti-communism, and it set the template for everything that followed across the continent. If the Congo was the blueprint, Angola was the masterpiece. For 27 years, Angola bled. A civil war that killed over 500,000 people, displaced 4 million, and left the country littered with landmines that still kill children today. And at the center of it all, the CIA. When Portugal's colonial empire collapsed in 1975, Angola had 3 liberation movements fighting for control. The CIA picked their horse. First the FNLA, then UNITA, led by Jonas Savimbi. The CIA funneled hundreds of millions of dollars in weapons to keep Angola burning. Savimbi was charming, eloquent, and brutal. He visited the White House. He shook hands with Ronald Reagan, who called him a freedom fighter. Meanwhile, in Angola, his forces were planting landmines in farmland and conscripting child soldiers. If this revelation disturbs you as much as it should, hit like and subscribe, because we are just getting started. What I am about to reveal is even darker. The war was never about freedom or communism. Angola had oil and diamonds. The Emplar government controlled the oil. Savimbi controlled the diamond mines. And American and European companies profited from both sides simultaneously. The Cold War in Africa was never cold. It was paid for in African blood. The war only ended when Savimbi was killed in 2002. By then, an entire generation knew nothing but violence, but the resources kept flowing westward. Now let us move to the Horn of Africa, where the CIA played a game so cynical it would make Machiavelli blush. Ethiopia and Somalia, 2 nations whose fates were twisted by Washington's shifting alliances. In the 1970s, the United States was backing Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. Arms, money, military advisors, the full package. Then a Marxist revolution toppled him. Overnight, Washington dropped Ethiopia and embraced Somalia's dictator, Siad Barre. Allies today, enemies tomorrow. Barre was a brutal authoritarian who used American weapons to invade Ethiopia's Ogaden region, triggering a war that killed tens of thousands. When Barr's usefulness expired in 1991, the CIA walked away, and Somalia collapsed into the failed state it remains today. Abandoned, no transition plan, no peacekeeping, no accountability. Just a country left with American weapons, clan rivalries, and zero functional government. They armed the dictator, then acted surprised when the country exploded. The same pattern played out across the Horn. In Sudan, the CIA worked with the Khartoum government in the 1990s, sharing intelligence even after the regime was committing atrocities in the south, because Sudan was providing intelligence on al-Qaeda, and that was enough to look the other way. Convenience over conscience, every single time. But this was only one theater in a much larger war for resources. 2011, Libya, the most prosperous nation in Africa, with the highest human development index on the continent, free healthcare, free education, and the largest proven oil reserves in Africa. Then NATO intervened. They called it humanitarian intervention, but the humanitarians brought bombs. Muammar Gaddafi was no saint. He was a dictator with blood on his hands. But here is what they never tell you on the news. Gaddafi was planning to create a gold-backed African currency called the dinar, designed to replace the French franc in West Africa and challenge the dollar's dominance in African oil trades. Declassified emails from Hillary Clinton's server. Yes, those emails, explicitly mentioned, preventing Gaddafi from creating this Pan-African currency as a strategic objective. Gold dinar dollar threat. The result, Libya went from Africa's richest nation to an open-air slave market. Literal slave auctions were documented by CNN in 2017. Migrants being sold for $400. The country they liberated became the country where humans are sold. Today, Libya has 2 rival governments, dozens of militias, and its oil is fought over by international powers. Mission accomplished. The real mission was always about what lay beneath the sand, and Libya connects directly to the deeper pattern we need to understand. Let us stop and ask the question that ties all of this together. Why Africa? Why this continent over and over for 7 decades? The answer is underneath your feet right now. Resources. Africa holds 30% of the world's mineral reserves, 60% of the world's cobalt, the element inside your phone battery, your laptop, your electric car, 90% of the world's platinum, vast reserves of uranium, gold, diamonds, coltan, lithium, and rare earth elements that power every piece of modern technology. 1. Congo, 60% of global cobalt. 2. South Africa, 90% of global platinum. 3. Guinea, largest bauxite reserves. 4. Nigeria, largest oil producer in Africa. 5. Zambia, critical copper supplier. And here is the pattern. Every single CIA intervention in Africa happened in a country sitting on strategic resources. Every single one. The coups follow the minerals like clockwork. The Congo had uranium and cobalt. Angola had oil and diamonds. Libya had oil and gold. Nigeria had oil. It was never about communism. It was never about democracy. It was never about humanitarian values. As the great Kwame Nkrumah, the father of Ghanaian independence, warned decades ago, neo-colonialism is the worst form of imperialism. For those who practice it, it means power without responsibility. They did not need to colonize the land anymore. They just needed to control who sat in the presidential palace. And that brings us to one of the most cynical operations of them all. Chad, a landlocked country in Central Africa that most Westerners cannot find on a map. And that is exactly why it was the perfect laboratory. In 1982, the CIA backed Hissène Habré in a coup against the existing government. Habré was not a freedom fighter. He was not a Democrat. He was a warlord who had already proven his willingness to use extreme violence. The CIA knew exactly who they were installing, and they did it anyway. For 8 years, Habré ran one of the most brutal regimes in African history. His secret police, the DDS, killed an estimated 40,000 people. Systematic torture, ethnic cleansing, mass executions, all documented by human rights organizations while it was happening. and Washington kept sending money. 40,000 dead, funded. Why? Because Chad bordered Libya, and Habré was useful as a counterweight to Gaddafi. That is it. 40,000 lives for a geopolitical chess move. They funded a mass murderer because his neighbor was inconvenient. In 2016, Habré was finally convicted of crimes against humanity by an African Union court. The first time an African court convicted a former head of state. But during the trial, not a single American official was called to testify about the support that made his reign of terror possible. The evidence of American complicity is overwhelming, but accountability remains absent. And Chad was not the only country where this playbook ran perfectly. Mozambique gained independence from Portugal in 1975 under Frelimo, a liberation movement with socialist leanings. Within 2 years, the CIA and apartheid South Africa had created Renamo, the Mozambican National Resistance, a rebel group manufactured from scratch, not born from popular grievance, not emerging from ethnic tensions, created in an intelligence office to destabilize a government that Washington did not like. They manufactured a rebel army, the way a company launches a product. Renamo had no ideology, no political platform, no vision for Mozambique. What they had was funding, weapons, and a simple mandate: destroy. And destroy they did. Renamo deliberately targeted civilians. They burned schools, hospitals, and food stores. They committed massacres so horrific that even hardened war correspondents struggled to report them. 1 million people died in a war created in a foreign intelligence office. 1 million dead, 5 million displaced, an entire country's infrastructure obliterated. The Mozambican Civil War lasted 16 years, and when it ended, Mozambique was one of the poorest countries on earth, a nation that had been deliberately impoverished to prove that socialist governance in Africa could not work. Created, funded, destroyed, forgotten. The same forces that destroyed the country would later return as investors, buying up the resources at a fraction of their value. But the ghost wars did not stay in the past. They evolved. Fast forward to today. The Cold War ended, but the operations did not. They just rebranded. After September 11, 2001, Africa became the new frontier of the war on terror. The United States established AFRICOM, the Africa Command, in 2007. Officially, it exists to counter terrorism and promote stability. Unofficially, expansion. The United States now has approximately 29 known military bases or outposts across Africa. Special forces operate in at least 13 African countries. Drone strikes are launched from bases in Djibouti, Niger, and Somalia. And yet, terrorism in Africa has increased by over 300% since AFRICOM was established. More military presence, more instability. The Sahel region, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, has become the epicenter of global terrorism. And every country in that region has experienced a military coup since 2020. Every country where they built a base eventually had a coup. In Niger, the United States spent over $100 million building a drone base. Then in 2023, the military government kicked them out. Drones bases, coups expelled. The new generation of African military leaders is not playing the Cold War game anymore. They are saying no. And that brings us to a chapter most people have deliberately forgotten, one that reveals the deepest hypocrisy of them all. South Africa, the apartheid regime, a government that classified its own citizens by skin color, stripped millions of their rights, and maintained power through systematic brutality. And the United States, the supposed champion of freedom and democracy, supported it for decades. The land of the free backed the architects of racial segregation. Nelson Mandela was on the CIA's watch list. The agency provided intelligence to the South African government that led to Mandela's arrest in 1962. A CIA officer later confirmed this to the New York Times. The man who would become the global symbol of freedom was captured with American help. The CIA tip-off was one of the greatest coups in South African intelligence history. Why did Washington support apartheid? Because the South African government was anti-communist, sat on vast gold and mineral reserves, and controlled shipping routes around the Cape. Freedom for some, chains for others, diamonds for the powerful. Ronald Reagan vetoed sanctions against apartheid South Africa. The man who called Jonas Savimbi a freedom fighter actively protected the most racist government on earth. They championed freedom at home while funding oppression abroad. Mandela remained on the United States terrorism watch list until 2008. The man who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993 was still classified as a terrorist by America 15 years later. And this was never about ideology. It was about the same thing it has always been about. So what is the pattern? Look at every case we have covered. Congo, Angola, Somalia, Libya, Chad, Mozambique, the Sahel, South Africa. Resources, control, power, repeat. Step 1. Identify a country with strategic resources or geopolitical value. Step 2. Find a local actor willing to serve your interests. Step 3. Arm them, fund them, train them. Step 4. When the country collapses, blame tribalism, corruption, or African dysfunction. Step 5. Return as investors to buy the wreckage at discount prices. 1. Identify the resources. 2. Install a friendly leader. 3. Fund the chaos. 4. Blame African dysfunction. 5. Buy the wreckage cheap. This is not ancient history. This is happening right now. As China, Russia, and the West compete for Africa's lithium, cobalt, and rare earth minerals, the same playbook is being dusted off. Different flags, same game. The continent's chaos was never an accident, it was always a business model. But here is what has changed. Africa is waking up. A new generation of leaders and citizens are demanding accountability, renegotiating contracts, and kicking out foreign military bases. The question is whether the powers that designed this system will allow the change or engineer another round of chaos to prevent it. As the great Frantz Fanon wrote, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. If you made it this far, comment fingerprints if you see who left their marks on Africa's wounds. Every government lies. The question is, what are they lying about?